I'm Jeff Wimmer from Studio Cycles and StudioCycles.com, and today in this segment we're going to talk about the differences between the Star Trac Spinner NXT and the new Schwinn AC Performance model. The cost on these bikes: the Star Trac Spinner NXT runs $1,400 to $1,600 online in the box, unassembled, untuned. The Schwinn AC Performance runs $1,600 up to $2,000 online in the box, unbuilt and untuned. When I say unbuilt, untuned, it's because these bikes never come out of the box optimal. In my experience, and I've done probably over 100,000 bikes in 15 years, they typically always come out of the box and they work, and probably for most folks they work well, but in my experience I've never once pulled a bike out of a box, put it together and had it work optimally, in other words 100%, without having to adjust, tension, align, tune, lubricate, which is a huge process that we do on every bike we sell. So a little bit of a cost difference between the AC Performance and the NXT. The NXT and the AC Performance both have aluminum frames. The AC Performance and the Spinner NXT both have integrated bottle cages in the handlebars. Both the AC Performance and the Star Trac Spinner NXT come out of the box with a SPD basket combo pedal. The big differences between the AC Performance and the Star Trac Spinner NXT, there are three big differences when you go from this bike to that bike. The first being that the AC Performance has a handlebar that not only adjusts up and down, but forwards and backwards. So having a fore and aft adjustment on the handlebar is huge if you're taller or if you're petite, because you can fine-tune the cockpit of the bike and the bike fits optimally instead of just going with whatever you can come up with in terms of just raising the handlebars up and down. The second big dynamic to the AC Performance bike is that it has virtual contact magnetic resistance. And to date, there are only two bikes in the industry that have magnetic resistance. One is the Kaiser M3, and the second are the new Schwinn AC series bikes, the Classic, the Sport, and the White Performance. Magnetic resistance is like having an adjustable headwind on your bike. There's no friction, there's no contact. In fact, they call the magnetic resistance on the bike virtual contact. With the Kaiser M3, you have 2 magnets in the magnet basket. With the Schwinn AC Performance, you have 6 magnets in a triangulated magnet basket. So the range of motion from easiest to hardest on the Schwinn is roughly 2 to 3 times broader than the Kaiser M3. The magnetic resistance is, in my experience, it's unbelievable compared to friction resistance, contact type resistance found on most other bikes. The other big dynamic from the Schwinn to the Star Trac is that the Star Trac, the bottom bracket on these bikes is night and day difference. The Star Trac uses a proprietary square tapered spindle, which is old technology. Every bike has a bottom bracket, bicycle or indoor group cycle. The bottom bracket fits into the frame. It's the bearing assembly that the crank arms rotate on when you pedal. You have the bottom bracket, you have the crank arms, you have the pedals. And the bottom bracket of the bike is typically what takes the biggest load in terms of energy from the rider. And it's also a part that fails rather quickly if parts of the bottom bracket and the crank assembly are not kept tight. If you've ever gone into a class, an indoor group cycling class, and you've seen a crank arm and a pedal laying on the floor, it's because it's either come off the bike because the crank bolt's not kept tight, which is not unusual. Most clubs are not proactive with their maintenance, they're reactive. But the other reason that you'd see a crank arm and a pedal laying on the floor is because the crank arm is actually snapped off from the assembly or the spindle of the bottom bracket. The bike industry, the technology in the bike industry has always been square tapered, the spindle that runs through the bottom bracket, crank arms attached to the spindle, you tighten the crank bolts, it presses the crank arms onto the spindle, and you have to periodically 2 to 3 times, maybe 4 times a year, retighten the crank bolts or the crank arm will come off or snap off. 10 years ago, the bicycle industry switched to isospline technology, where the spindle is no longer tapered on the ends. It's now uniform from one end to the other, and the spindle itself is splined, so the crank arms slide off and on. You tighten the crank bolts, and the crank bolts never come loose, the cranks never come loose. And with isospline technology, it's virtually impossible to snap a spindle in an isospline technology bottom bracket. So, and then in terms of manufacturing cost, the Star Tracs use a proprietary square tapered bottom bracket, which means they have this bottom bracket made for their bikes. It does no other bottom bracket works but their bottom bracket. The cost of their bottom bracket from a manufacturing perspective, in my guess, is probably anywhere from $6 to $12. The isospline technology bottom bracket in the Schwinn AC bikes costs roughly $30 to $40. So it's probably 4 to 5 times more money to use a bottom bracket in this bike than in that bike. And it lasts 4 to 5 times longer. So just a quick recap. The AC Performance, the big difference is they're both aluminum, they both have integrated bottle cages, they both come out of the box with SPD basket pedals. They both have perimeter weighting in the flywheel, albeit the Star Trac Spinner NXT has a bit more weight in the perimeter of their flywheel due to the fact that on the Schwinn flywheel they have an aluminum disc on the outside perimeter to facilitate the magnet basket dropping down. The AC Performance has fore and aft adjustments. It has a usable, comfortable aero position, and it has magnetic resistance. We have both of these bikes at studiocycles.com. Our bikes are pre-tuned, pre-built, and then repackaged, and then double boxed, and we include our own exclusive lifetime warranty and lifetime free parts replacement, as well as lifetime email and phone tech support. You can check both of these bikes out, as well as helpful Bike Buyer Aid videos in our Bike Buyer Aid video section for both residential customers and commercial customers at studiocycles.com.